At my golden child brother's graduation celebration, my parents gave a speech in which they referred to him as one of their greatest blessings, contrasting him with me, their second-born, who they deemed useless. As a result, I decided to sever contact with them. 3 years later, after discovering my brother's hidden habit, they now regret their actions and want me back. This all unfolded 3 years ago at my brother's graduation, a moment that left me deeply embarrassed by my parents when they publicly humiliated me. The event, attended by close friends and family, was meant to celebrate my older brother Andrew, who had just completed his college degree and secured a fantastic job that he was thrilled to begin. My parents were shocked when I shared the news, almost as if they never expected me to attend college, let alone earn a scholarship. My brother even checked the acceptance letter twice, unable to believe that I had actually achieved something on my own. Clearly, they had all underestimated me, and I felt a small sense of satisfaction seeing their surprised faces. However, my dad quickly dampened my mood by remarking that it was a good thing I received a full scholarship since they hadn't saved any money for my college education. I simply shook my head. They had no trouble funding my brother's education, yet didn't bother saving anything for mine. When the time came for me to leave, I packed up and moved into my college dorm. From that day on, I made the conscious choice to cut off all communication with my parents and my brother, Andrew. I didn't feel the need to explain my decision. After all, they had shown time and again that my feelings, my perspective, and my worth meant nothing to them. Why waste my energy trying to make them understand something they had proven they couldn't even acknowledge? There was no apology that could erase the years of emotional pain they had caused me. And since they hadn't even offered one, I knew trying to reason with them was pointless. In the weeks and months that followed, my family reached out repeatedly through emails and messages. At first, I thought about reading them, hoping, just maybe, they had reflected on their actions and were trying to make amends. But each message was simply a reminder of who they were. Instead of taking responsibility for the hurt they had caused, their emails were full of attempts to manipulate me into thinking I was being unreasonable. They claimed I had overreacted, painting my decision to cut ties as childish and impulsive. The underlying message was clear. I was wrong for severing ties with them and was the one breaking up the family. As a result, I never bothered to respond to any of their messages. My college experience so far has been incredible. I've been able to concentrate fully on my studies, pursue my interests, and, most importantly, build friendships with people who truly see me for who I am. I even started a part-time job at a local diner to save money for my future. It's been enjoyable meeting new people there and hearing about their lives. Since distancing myself from my family, I've devoted my time to my classes, social life, and making the most of everything my new environment offers, filling my days with meaningful experiences. I haven't spent a single moment missing them or wondering how they're doing. Then, yesterday, I received an unexpected email from my parents. They hadn't contacted me in quite a while, as I had never responded to any of their previous messages. This email urged me to get in touch with them right away, claiming they had urgent news to share. Despite everything, despite all the years of pain and rejection, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something bad had happened. My heart began to race, and I couldn't stop worrying that someone in the family had fallen seriously ill, or, worse, passed away. Even though I had resolved to keep them at a distance, my concern took over. I unblocked them, picked up the phone, and called them back. My heart was pounding as I braced myself for whatever news they had to share. They told me the reason for their contact was to inform me about my older brother, Andrew, who was facing a major personal crisis. Apparently, they had discovered that he had been struggling with drug addiction, something that had deeply affected his life. According to them, his addiction had escalated to the point where he had lost his job, drained his savings, and now had no options left. This news was completely unexpected. I had no idea that anything like this was happening. In my mind, Andrew had always been the responsible, dependable sibling, the one who had his life together. But now, he was battling a drug addiction. It was hard to believe. I could tell that in my parents' eyes, Andrew's addiction shattered the perfect image they had of him. I could feel their disbelief, their desperation, and, above all, their concern about how this would reflect on their reputation if anyone else found out. As they shared the details, they also expressed a hope that I might have some answers. They were shocked that someone like Andrew, who had always been so grounded, could fall into something as destructive as drug addiction. My mother then asked me, her voice filled with suspicion, "You didn't introduce him to drugs, did you?" I was stunned by the implication. The thought that they could believe I had anything to do with Andrew's struggles, especially something as serious as introducing him to drugs, was not only ridiculous, but deeply insulting. I didn't even do drugs myself, so how could I have introduced them to my older brother? Besides, I hadn't been in contact with Andrew or the rest of my family in years because of the way they had treated me. I had moved on with my life, building a future far from their toxic environment. Yet, now that their perfect image of Andrew was crumbling, they were quick to find someone else to blame, and I was the easiest target. I told them how absurd their accusation was, and suggested they speak to Andrew directly before jumping to conclusions. During the conversation, I noticed how fixated my parents were on the shame they feared their family would face if Andrew's addiction became public. My father, instead of showing concern for my brother, kept focusing on the embarrassment he felt about discovering this dark side of his perfect son. He went on and on about how shocking it was to find out about Andrew's secret struggle and how people would talk if they found out. Then, my dad started pleading with me to come back home to help them take care of Andrew, as he and my mom felt overwhelmed by the situation. "What do we even do?" he asked, his voice filled with shame. "Maybe you can talk to him for us." When my parents stood up to give their speech in Andrew's honor, I expected them to highlight his achievements. After all, he had worked hard to reach this milestone and deserved to be recognized. However, their speech soon took an unexpected turn. While they praised Andrew as one of the greatest gifts in their lives, I wasn't shocked by this point, as I had already accepted that they favored Andrew over me. He had always been the more successful child, the one my parents frequently compared me to. Then my parents made a disturbing joke, saying they should have stopped having children after Andrew, because second-born children, like me, are usually useless. They said that with just Andrew, they could have focused more on him instead of wasting energy on me. I was shocked by their hurtful words, especially because they were spoken so carelessly while I was sitting right there. I looked around, hoping someone would recognize how painful their words were, but all I saw were family members laughing along, treating it as if it was harmless humor. This, after years of no contact, was his request to me. I couldn't believe it. I told them I couldn't help Andrew. He needed professional support. My brother is struggling with something as severe and intricate as addiction, and it's not something that can simply be addressed with a family intervention at home. I emphasized that if they genuinely cared about his recovery and wanted to support him, the most compassionate thing they could do was to send him to a treatment facility where skilled professionals could guide his healing. However, my mother immediately rejected the idea of rehab, practically recoiling at the thought of their family name being tarnished by his admission. She argued that sending him to a treatment center would only damage their reputation in front of others. She couldn't bear the idea of people knowing that their seemingly perfect son had such a serious issue as addiction. My mother chastised me for even suggesting it, as if admitting his addiction was more shameful than the addiction itself. She insisted that I needed to return home, that the three of us had to work together to care for Andrew, keeping an eye on him constantly so he wouldn't relapse, as if constant surveillance could magically solve the problem. She kept going on about how they just wanted Andrew to feel better and get back to his normal life as soon as possible. In their minds, if no one else found out, everything could go back to normal. They wanted me to pretend as if everything was fine, while hiding his struggles from everyone else. As I listened, I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Why were my parents so obsessed with their image and what others thought of them? My brother was clearly facing a serious problem, and here was an opportunity for them to step up and show they cared more about his well-being than appearances. Yet, they couldn't do it. Clearly, nothing had changed, and now they were trying to pull me back in, expecting me to maintain this family facade by helping them with the brother they had always compared me to. I told them I needed time to think it over, as I had school and a job to focus on, so I couldn't just leave. My parents insisted that I could take a couple of weeks off to help, since they really needed me right now. Part of me wanted to make sure Andrew was okay, to see if there was anything I could do for him, but another part of me just wanted to be selfish and let my parents handle their golden child on their own. Even now, they cared more about saving face than dealing with the core issue. So, I wasn't sure if I could be much help. Am I wrong for refusing to go back home and care for my drug-addicted brother? Wow, I didn't expect this story to gain so much attention. I've received hundreds of comments, and it's taking me some time to read through them. I want to clarify a few things. I don't hate my brother. In fact, I truly care about him and want to help. However, in the past 3 years, I've found a peace and stability I hadn't felt before, all because I've had no contact with my family. Reconnecting with Andrew means I'd be reopening the door for my parents to re-enter my life, and that's something I'm not sure I'm ready for. For everyone asking how Andrew ended up struggling with addiction and whether this is something he's dealt with for years, I don't know for sure. In my eyes, Andrew was always the golden child, praised as the perfect son. But being placed on such a pedestal often comes with enormous pressure to maintain that image, leaving no room for failure or vulnerability. If Andrew believed his value was solely tied to his accomplishments and the way others saw him, any setback, no matter how small, could have been devastating. I think over the years, drugs may have become his way of coping with the overwhelming expectations and the fear of disappointing our parents. The idea that he might have been quietly suffering all this time without confiding in me makes me feel even sadder. I wish he had felt he could open up to me sooner. I would have wanted to be there for him and help him through it before things got to this point. It just makes me feel helpless, like there's a huge part of his life I didn't know about, and could have supported him through if I had known. Also, because my parents are high-achieving people, they expected nothing but the best from both Andrew and me from an early age. I need more time to process everything, and I'll update you all if anything else happens. Update. After much internal debate and encouragement from some of the comments, I decided to reach out to Andrew. Despite everything, he's my brother, and I felt it was important to hear from him directly, instead of relying on my parents' version of events. I sent him a simple text asking if he wanted to talk. It took him a few hours to reply, but when he did, he agreed to a phone call. When we spoke, the voice on the other end was so different from the brother I remembered. Andrew was quieter, hesitant, and there was a noticeable heaviness in his tone. Little by little, He opened up about what he'd been going through. Andrew confessed that he had been struggling with addiction for the past few years. It all started shortly after he graduated and began working at his law firm. Having always been the perfect, high-achieving son, he felt the pressure to maintain that image at work, working harder than anyone else in hopes of earning more recognition or a promotion. Eventually, he became exhausted and burned out. But even then, he felt like he couldn't slow down or ask for help. He had to live up to everyone's expectations. When the stress became unbearable, a friend introduced him to recreational drug use to help him unwind. What started as occasional use eventually spiraled into a dependency before he even realized it. Andrew also admitted that for the longest time he felt trapped. He couldn't tell our parents that he was struggling because he knew how they would react. Their obsession with appearances and their refusal to acknowledge anything that didn't fit their narrative made him feel isolated. Even as he lost control, he kept pretending everything was fine. It wasn't until he began using drugs, lost his job, and depleted his savings that he couldn't hide the truth anymore. He told me how ashamed he was to admit this to me and asked if I was judging him as harshly as he judged himself. Hearing his story was heartbreaking. For the first time, I saw that the pedestal our parents put him on wasn't a privilege. It was a prison. While I had been struggling with being overlooked, he had been suffocating under the weight of being their golden child. We were both, in our own ways, victims of our parents' favoritism and control. I told him I wished he had confided in me earlier because I would never have judged him. I understood him more than he realized, and my only regret was not being there for him during this time. Andrew then sincerely apologized for everything that happened between us. He apologized for always siding with our parents and admitted that, at the time, he couldn't understand my pain because he was consumed by his own. He expressed how much he regretted not standing up for me during the graduation speech and how awful he felt for making me feel like I didn't matter. While my parents had often made me feel inferior and unworthy, this was the first time they publicly displayed it, leaving me exposed and unable to ignore the fact that, in their eyes, I was simply not enough compared to Andrew. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It confirmed what I had always felt. Andrew would always be their cherished son, and I would always be an afterthought. Growing up as the second-born, I became accustomed to the subtle favoritism in our home. It showed in their words, actions, and habits. On my birthdays, they often forgot to wish me well, and on several occasions, they were conveniently away on work trips. Meanwhile, Andrew's birthday was always a grand event, with both of them there, planning an extravagant party and ensuring he felt adored. I quickly learned not to expect much for my birthday, realizing that it simply wasn't as important to them. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger I had carried for so long and remind him of how much his words had hurt me. But the bigger part of me, the part that had always looked up to him, just felt sad for all we had been through. I told him I appreciated his apology, and that I didn't blame him. After all, he had been as much a victim of our parents' toxic behavior as I had, just in a different way. Andrew told me he was scared about the future and unsure if he could recover. He felt like he had let everyone down, but more than anything, he was afraid of letting himself down. He said he wanted to go to rehab, but felt stuck because our parents were so against it. They had convinced him that going to a treatment center would bring shame to the family, and he didn't want to disappoint them even more. I told him firmly that he needed to prioritize his recovery above everything else. I explained, just like I had told our parents, that addiction is something he can't overcome on his own, and professional help is necessary. It's his best chance at getting his life back on track. He seemed hesitant, but I could tell my words had an impact. I offered to help him research treatment options and suggested that, if he wanted, I could help him find a program far away from our hometown, where he wouldn't have to worry about gossip or judgment. I reassured him there was no shame in seeking help, and that he deserved to take this step for himself, not for anyone else. By the end of our conversation, Andrew sounded lighter, almost as if sharing his truth with me had relieved some of the burden he'd been carrying. He thanked me for reaching out and promised to seriously consider what we discussed. I told him I'd be there for him. After talking with Andrew, I feel much better. I wish we had reconnected years ago. Anyway, Andrew has agreed to enter a treatment center far from our hometown. My parents are furious with him for this decision, and are also angry that I'm supporting him. They can't understand that Andrew and I are now talking behind their backs. They've threatened that if Andrew doesn't recover, they'll blame me for encouraging him to make this choice. For now, I've decided to support Andrew from a distance. I'll continue to check in on him emotionally while he recovers. If our relationship improves, I'll visit him in the future. As for my parents, I'm returning to no contact. I won't let them drag me back into their control. I hope this is the wake-up call they need to reflect on their actions. But honestly, I'm not holding my breath. I was an outgoing child, but instead of being encouraged, I was often criticized for being troublesome or annoying just for being myself. I was scolded for being too talkative or expressing my interests, and was labeled difficult because I didn't fit the quiet, reserved image they preferred. On the other hand, Andrew's more introverted personality was constantly praised, and he was viewed as the ideal son, well-behaved and mature. As a result, over the years, Andrew was the one who received admiration and public praise, while I was the subject of criticism. I tried to meet their expectations, hoping that if I acted differently or achieved more, they would eventually see me in a new light. But as I grew older, it became clear that no matter how much I tried, I could never be Andrew. Eventually, I stopped trying to change and accepted the reality of their constant admiration for him, while they ignored everything I had accomplished. What hurt the most, however, was that up until that point, my parents had never humiliated me in front of others. This was the first time they allowed the entire extended family to see just how little respect they had for me. Even worse, no one in the family spoke up or showed any sympathy for me after my parents made those jokes at my expense. My parents continued to praise Andrew, their voices full of pride that I had never experienced. Then, they proudly announced that they had bought him a brand new car, a gift he had always dreamed of. The room erupted in applause and cheers as everyone focused their attention on Andrew, who embraced them, full of joy and gratitude. At that moment, I felt like an outsider in my own family. Strangely, I never felt jealous of Andrew. We had always gotten along well, and I genuinely believed that whatever success he had was deserved. But that speech broke me. Afterward, I did confront my parents about the humiliation I had endured. For years, I had quietly tolerated their favoritism, disregard, and hurtful remarks. I had internalized it, thinking that maybe if I kept quiet and didn't make a fuss, things would get better. But that night, after being ridiculed in front of everyone, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I was exhausted from hiding my pain and pretending that their words didn't hurt me. So, I gathered the courage to speak up, hoping my parents would realize the depth of the damage they had caused and feel some remorse for making me feel insignificant. When I confronted them, however, their response was cold and dismissive. They barely considered my feelings, and instead of offering an apology, they told me I was overreacting. My years of being overlooked and belittled seemed to be nothing to them. They acted as if my feelings didn't matter, as though I had no right to be upset. My dad even told me that he was not proud of me and that I shouldn't blame them for being disappointed in who I was. I remember the way he said it, so plainly, as if I didn't matter to him. My mom, on the other hand, dismissed my feelings, telling me I was being too needy and that I should stop overreacting. It was as if they were implying that I hadn't earned the basics of being their child because I hadn't accomplished enough, and therefore I didn't deserve their love or pride the way Andrew did. The matter eventually reached my brother, who sided with my parents, insisting I was being too harsh. He told me that I shouldn't be so upset over their graduation speech, that it was just a harmless joke. Then he said something that stung more than anything else. He told me that if I had worked as hard as he did, maybe I could make them proud too. Those words cut deep. The implication that I hadn't tried hard enough to gain their respect was crushing. It felt as though all my efforts and struggles had been invisible to him. As my older brother, I had hoped he would stand up for me, but instead, he betrayed me with those words. Everything changed after that. I realized that I was finished with my family, done trying to win their approval, done explaining myself, and done waiting for love or recognition that would never come. From that point onward, I focused all my energy on creating something for myself. I dedicated myself to my studies, concentrating on what I could control and what would lead me to a better future. 2 years later, my hard work paid off when I was accepted into my dream college with a full scholarship. An achievement that was solely mine. It was a success I earned through my own effort, determination, and refusal to let my family's neglect define me. For the first time, it felt like I had truly accomplished something for myself.